Hi there, welcome back to my channel. First of all, I wanted to apologize because I know that my uploads have not been very regular. When I started this channel, I decided that I was going to upload once a week. And then I soon realized that if I were to do that, I was going to be very stressed out. I would have to come up with a video every week to make and to record it, edit, and put it out. And I wasn't going to be doing much more. And since this channel is not my job, since it is just a way of passing time and talking about things that I enjoy, I decided to take the pressure off me and upload whenever I wish and whenever I have a video ready. So I hope that's okay. You can keep up to date on my Instagram when I upload a video, or if you subscribed and hit the bell button, you can get a notification every time I upload a video. So this video is for beginners. If you're thinking of starting knitting, or if you have started knitting, you might enjoy this. And I don't have a structure for the video, so I'm not going to be talking about certain stuff with authority because I'm the person who knows the most about this stuff. I'm just going to be talking about things that have worked for me, things that I have realized along the way, and that might be useful to you. But if you disagree with any of this stuff, it's totally okay. I would like to have a discussion. So if you want to drop me a comment, we can chat about any of the topics I'm going to talk. And this is actually a video that was requested by a friend of mine. Mostly I have friends and family watching this channel, so it's nice to get some feedback from them. And one of my friends said that my first videos inspired her to start knitting again. I know that she knitted a little bit a few years ago. And then by watching my videos, she decided that she wanted to have a go again. And she asked me to make a video about needles and yarn and things like that, so she could learn a little bit more before making decisions on what type of stuff to buy. So the first thing that we need to address is, what do you knit with and what do you crochet with? So to knit, you use 2 needles or circular needles like this ones. These are circular needles, and you have 2 needles, right? 2 needle points, and you cast on the stitches in one of the needles, and then you work your way around. You work your way through the row and then back. Or if you're working in the circular mode, you knit circularly. So you always have your stitches on the needle, and then you work like this from one needle to another. If you are crocheting, you use a crochet hook like this one, and you just have the crochet, so you only have one stitch in the hook at a time, and you work your stitches like this. So if you ever wondered why do you see some people working with yarn and they're working with 1 needle or 2 needles, it's because with crochet we use the hook, and with knitting we use 2 needles. In terms of types of needles, you have straight needles like these ones, okay, 2 of them of the same size, or you can have circular needles, which are 2 needles with a cable in between. And I recommend, if you're going to start knitting, I recommend trying the circular needles first, because I think most people enjoy circular needles more than they enjoy straight needles. And this is not a rule for everyone, but a lot of people only have circular needles and prefer to work on circular needles. And they're more versatile because you can, if you're working back and forth, you can still work that on the circular needles. But if you are working on the round, you can only do it in the circular needles and not on the straight needles, for obvious reasons, right? You have your work like this and you just work in the round. So to buy new needles, if you want to start knitting, you don't have any needles, I would avoid going to places like Amazon and Temu or whatever and just buying a set of needles of all sizes, like this one that I have, which I bought off of Amazon when I first started. And that's because they're really rubbish most of the times. That's not to say that you can't find good quality needles on those websites, but generally speaking, the cheaper ones and the ones that you're gonna kind of come across my cat is talking to us, so apologies for that. But the ones that most types that you're going to come across are cheaply made. So for example, this particular set, the cable is very flimsy plastic that after I worked a few times with the needle starts snapping right where the needle meets the cable, and then it's a pain to cut and glue back again and work the needles again. They also sometimes chip, like these, I believe these are bamboo needles, and they start chipping quite frequently, which means that your stitches get caught in the needle point. So you can get really good quality bamboo needles, and I would recommend starting with either you invest in some good needles, or you go to like a charity shop if you're in the UK, for example, and you can sometimes find knitting needles as well very cheaply. So you can always go to a charity shop and buy some cheap needles to try with, and then once you have more practice and you know what you like, you can then invest in some needles. I particularly like interchangeable needles, and those are the ones where you have, I'm going to show you some. You have the needle points like this with a bit that screws on a cable. And I don't have a normal size cable to show you, but I have a shorter cable that it's used to knit socks or sleeves, for example. They're for smaller work. You can see that the cable is really short, and currently my longer cables are all being used in different projects, so I don't have one to show you. But what happens is you screw the needle point into the cable, and then you use a tool like this or similar to this to attach them, secure them really well, so then they don't like unscrew while you're working. You can get cables that are longer, different sizes, like the standard size, and then the longer size and the shorter size. And then if you're working with the shorter size, let's say you're going to make a pair of socks or you're going to make a sleeve, you need the needle points that are a bit shorter, because so you can see the difference in size between these two. These are the normal size and these are the shorter ones. And if I try to attach the longer ones to the short cable, I don't think these are even the same size, but anyway, let's try it. But you can see that I can't do this because the cable doesn't go that far. So you need shorter needles to attach to your cables. And you can buy these interchangeable needles as a set, or you can buy them individually. And I suggest you buy them individually. So you buy a cable and you buy the needle size you need for the project you're going to make. And then when you move on to another project and you need another needle size, then you buy another set of needles. And in the end, if you buy all sizes, that's going to be more expensive than buying a set. But the reality is it's unlikely you're going to need all the sizes ever, because maybe you'll find out that you don't like chunky knits, you don't need really thick needles, you just need the smaller ones, and you end up repeating the same sizes many times. So I don't think it's economically savvy to buy the set. Another thing that you might see on YouTube is people suggesting you buy an interchangeable needle set from Amazon. And I don't like that, because if you buy a needle set from Amazon, the likelihood of you in a few years' time needing to buy another cable or another needle is high, because you might snap a needle, or your cable might get worn out and you might need another one. And then you're going to have to find that specific brand and see if they sell the cables or the needles separately, and that's going to be really hard. So my suggestion is you find out a general brand, like for example Knit Pro, my needles are from Knit Pro. I think it's called the Symphony set, and you find a brand that's widely commercially available, and you buy from that brand, because then the likelihood of you finding that same brand when you in the future you need to replace a needle, it's much higher than if you buy a random set off of Amazon. But that's just my opinion, so you go with what makes more sense for you. Talking about needle sizes, usually you have two sizes on a needle. One, for example, this one is a 4mm US size 6, so you'll have the millimeters of the needle across, and then you have the size in US standard. And the pattern, if you're following a pattern, usually it will say one of the sizes or both sizes. If it's a good pattern, you'll have both sizes. So it's very important, because you need, when you start a new project, let's say you're making a jumper and you bought a pattern, you will have gauge information. And the gauge is, okay, let's say you need 10 stitches and 10 rows. You make like a square. It's called a swatch. You make that, and then you measure how big is your piece, and then you can see if it matches the gauge of the project, of the pattern, or if you have to adjust your gauge. So if you have to go one needle size up or one needle size down. So if, let's say, your gauge is too small compared to the pattern, let's say you should have 10 centimeters, but you have 8, then maybe try and make another gauge swatch with a needle set, with a needle higher, so larger than the one that says in the pattern, and see if you then meet gauge. This is super important. Another consideration is the type of needle. So often you have plastic ones, bamboo or wood ones, or metal ones. And I would steer clear from the plastic ones, because they tend not to be very good quality, and focus on either the metal ones or the wood ones. And you can buy one and try it. I only used wood or bamboo, because I find the metal needles to be very slippy. But some people like that. They like their stitches to slip away from the needle much more easily. So they tend to use metal needles, although I much prefer the wood ones. Okay, let's talk about yarn. There's a world of information you can get about yarn, and it's a very complex topic. So I'm not an expert. I'm just going to talk about the things I know and the things I do, and then you can keep learning about it from other videos or from other people that know a lot more than me, and then make your own decision. Generally speaking, we have two types of yarn: synthetic yarn and natural fiber. The synthetic, as the name suggests, is made with some type of plastic. So it could be nylon, or it can be polyamide, or many others. And the problem with that is that when you wash it, it releases microplastics, which are not very good for our health, or not very good for the health of the animals in the ecosystems they end up in. There's a very good video by Isabella from Breathing Yarn. Well, she talks about the sustainability of yarn, and you can learn a lot from that video. And one thing that's very clear is that no yarn is sustainable. So if you're very much into sustainability, you can do your own research before buying a type of yarn, and then adjust the type of yarn you're going to use to your project, the way that it makes more sense to you. One thing that you need to know about natural fiber yarns is that unless they're superwash, that it says on the label it's superwash, you should wash it by hand. And this is a big consideration. If you're going to start knitting, but you don't see yourself hand washing your knits and taking a lot of good care, maybe consider buying a synthetic yarn or a superwash yarn. And superwash means that the natural fibers have been chemically treated, so that they can be washable in the washing machine and spun and dried in a dryer, maybe even. So that's a big consideration to have when you're choosing your yarn. And Wool Needles Hand have a very good video on superwash yarn, which I'll link below as well. When buying yarn, I tend to have the same considerations that I use when buying needles, which is I tend to avoid shops like Amazon or Temu, because I'm gonna have less of an oversight of where that yarn came from, what were the practices used to make that yarn. Synthetic yarn tends to be cheaper than natural fiber, but for example, if you want to start with synthetic yarn because it is a bit cheaper and you don't know how much you're gonna enjoy knitting and if you're even gonna finish a project, try to go to places like charity shops where you can buy some yarn at a much discounted price. And that means that you're not buying from Amazon or places like that. If you're a beginner, I recommend you always start with the brand of yarn that says that it's recommended with the pattern. So let's say that you bought a pattern to make a jumper and they recommend a certain type of yarn and how many balls of yarn they recommend. My recommendation is you follow that to start with, and then when you become a little bit more advanced, an advanced beginner, you can start substituting yarn. So if a pattern suggests a type of yarn but you want another one, then you can start playing with that. But first of all, I would use the recommended yarn in the pattern. I think that's very important. If we're talking about natural fibers, you have fibers that are more suitable for summery items like cotton, bamboo, linen, or you have warmer fibers that are more suitable for winter garments like wool, alpaca, mohair, etc. You can often, if it's a better known brand, often you can find more information about their yarn online, which is very handy. So let's say you saw some yarn you want to use, but you don't know what the composition is, it doesn't say on the label, you can easily search that online these days. So for example, here I have two bits of yarn. This one, poor thing, the label has been battered to a pulp. But I have this Sadness yarn that is linen, and it also has viscose. So this is not 100% natural fiber, it has viscose in it. And this one is an alpaca wool from Sadness as well. And I can immediately tell by the touch that this is much warmer wool, much warmer yarn than this one, which I use for summery items. So that's another consideration. If you want to make a jumper that you're going to wear in winter, don't go for a cotton, for example. Go for wool, go for alpaca, go for a natural fiber that it's going to be warmer. Another thing to consider is the weight of the yarn, and that means the thickness of the yarn. So if the pattern recommends, let's say, a DK, which means double knit, if you're going to substitute the yarn for something else, try to substitute for a yarn that's also DK, because otherwise you're going to have gauge problems. Often in the label or online, you'll find the information of the weight of the yarn. So if it's DK or fingering, lace, etc. And that often determines the size of the needle that you need to use as well. So thinner yarns, you should work with smaller needles, and thicker yarns with bigger needle size. Another thing you can often find in the labels is the washing instructions, which are very handy. So if you are about to start a new project and you know that you're not going to have the patience to hand wash your knit, maybe try to buy some yarn that can be washed in the washing machine. Otherwise, what's going to happen is you're going to use a natural fiber that can only be hand washed, and then you're going to put it in the washing machine and it's going to shrink and it's going to felt and it's going to ruin your garment. Another thing that'd be good to discuss is notions. So notions are those bits and bobs that you can buy to aid your knitting or crochet, like stitch markers or cutesy things to have in your stash. But the truth is, I always like to remember the women that came before us that used to knit and crochet all day long without many notions. And you know, back then we didn't have stitch markers or anything like that. So before you get too excited and start buying all those bits and bobs and start spending a lot of money, my recommendation is to start simple. Start with the needles and the yarn. That's all you need, and some scissors that you might have around the house. And then with time you can start thinking, okay, maybe it would be nice to have some stitch markers, for example. But until then, you can mark your stitches with bits of wool of a different color, for example, or even the same color. So you don't need to be buying a lot of things to start knitting. It's actually quite a affordable hobby if you consider things very carefully. Yarn can be expensive, okay? You can spend easily like €100 or £100 on a garment. So always plan very well what you're gonna make. Is it something you're gonna wear a lot and for many, many years to come? If yes, it might be worth spending that much money on a jumper. Plan your project, make sure that it's something you want to wear, that's not just nice to see on other people. And I say this because when I started crocheting, for example, I started getting very excited about all these patterns and started making all these patterns. And then I realized that I didn't actually like the look of crochet garments. So I wasn't gonna end up wearing most of the things I made, which was a shame because I'd spent all that money, I spent all that time making something, and then I wasn't gonna wear it. So my best advice is plan very well, think very carefully, is this something I'm gonna be wearing? Is this something I wanna make? How much money am I willing to put into this? How much care am I willing to put into treating this garment, hand washing it, drying it flat, etc. Another thing you can do if you're very much into sustainability is thinking, okay, I have a couple of jumpers in my wardrobe that I don't use. Should I give them away, or should I use the yarn for something else? And even if it's a store-bought jumper, if it doesn't have massive holes in it or if it's not felted, you can frog it and make something else. So I'm going to show you an example of that. When I was about 15, I bought a really lovely 100% wool jumper. I think it was superwash because we used to wash it in the washing machine with nothing bad happening. So I think it was superwash. But it was like a lovely jumper made by hand in the north of Portugal. It was like a typical jumper from that region. And I wore it for many, many years until it started fraying in the sleeves, and I really couldn't use it more because it was just falling apart. So what I decided to do was to frog it, and I made this cardigan, which I now use all the time. So what you can see here, it's a cardigan that I've made with that wool, and then I added bits of other yarns I had in my stash that I wasn't using. I believe these are all Shetland wool, this bit here of color. And I use this a lot. So I transformed a jumper that I wasn't wearing anymore. Instead of throwing it in landfill, I transformed it into something I'm going to continue to wear, which is fantastic. So another thing I think it's important to consider when you start knitting or crocheting is start simple. You might see a jumper that you want to make straight away when you've barely just started knitting or crocheting. And the truth is you probably still don't have the skills to make that. So start simple, start with like a shawl or a scarf or something like that where you can practice, and then you can move on to more complicated items. Because the truth is, if you start straight away with very difficult things, you might end up with a garment that it's full of defects and you're not going to enjoy it. You're not going to enjoy wearing it and you're not going to like it. If you're fine with it, go ahead and start straight away in the more difficult project. But if you think that you're a bit of a perfectionist and that if the garment you made is full of mistakes, you're not going to enjoy wearing it, then maybe really consider making something a bit more simple. Another thing I wanted to touch on is advice for when people ask you to make things. Because I had a lot of that when I started crocheting and knitting. And it was people knowing that I've made something and say, I want one for me. Will you make me one? And I think people mean well, but they don't realize how much work it goes into making a garment. So this is supposed to be your hobby. This is something that you need to enjoy. Otherwise, what's the point? So if people tell you things like, you need to make one for me, or I'll buy you one, they try to make you transform your hobby into a business, which you might not want to do that. Then feel free to say no, or feel free to say, yeah, maybe one day I'll make you a jumper, but right now I have too many projects on the go. It's okay to be selfish. It's okay to make things just for yourself. I, for example, have made things for other people, but it was never like a request. It was something that I decided I wanted to gift to that person, and I planned the project and I made what I wanted and then I gifted it. But it was never a case of people, requesting things from me, because in the end, it might be a lot of stress to be making something for someone else. And you might not want that stress. This is supposed to be a joyful, mindful hobby.
Very demure, very mindful.
That you will need to continue to enjoy to keep making. Otherwise, what's the point? Okay, I think that's all I wanted to say. It might have been a bit of a fast video, and there might have been too much information, or maybe too little information, because I know I summarized some topics that there was a lot more that I could have said about them. But I didn't want to bombard you with information if you're just starting. So consider this as some inspiration to start knitting and some information for your benefit. And I hope you will enjoy your hobby and make the things you want to make. And never forget that it's a hobby. It's something for you to enjoy. So if you like this, please give me a like and a subscribe. And maybe leave me a comment, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.